When we analyzed Mark Jacobson's plan, we gave him every possible advantage we could. The best panel on the market, the discounts, NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab, as prophesied discounts. We gave him the discounts. We gave him very optimistic capacity factors. And long story short, we gave him every single advantage we possibly could. We bent over backwards, and it just does not freaking work. As you probably know, Mark Jacobson of Stanford has proposed an all renewables national grid for 2050, and it's become quite the rage. Tim and I spent the last year analyzing his 50-state roadmap by comparing and contrasting it with an all-nuclear grid of the same capacity. In the next several minutes, we're going to walk you through some of the highlights of our paper. Tim will kick things off, but before we begin, I'd like to mention two important points. Here's the first one. There are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We are all crew. And here's the second one. Mother Nature doesn't give a damn about anyone's favorite technology. She doesn't care if some people think that nuclear power is awesome, and if others think it's the work of the devil. And she doesn't care if some people think that global warming is subtle science, or if other people think it's an anti-capitalist con game concocted by liberal academics angling for grant money. She doesn't frankly care what anyone thinks, hopes, or believes. All Mother Nature cares about is objective reality, quantified by math, explored by science, and both disciplines guided by a diligent respect for the true nature of things. And on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Tim, and he's going to walk you through a brief summary of what we found.
Well, what the 2050 roadmap plan calls for is an all-electric American society powered by a 1,591 gigawatt grid. That's all our nation's primary energy on the electric grid generated by renewables. By renewables, they mean wind, solar, hydro in its three manifestations, and a tiny nod to geothermal. To do that, they intend to utilize existing renewables and pumped hydro storage and expand our existing large hydro dams with additional turbines for peaking capability, and also to open the existing turbines for a greater number of hours per year, thereby raising their capacity factor. After they do that, they'll have to install 1,515 gigawatts of new build renewables to bring the total up to 1,591 gigawatts of average power on the grid. To accomplish that with solar, we're talking about land mount solar. That'll take a land area equivalent to Maryland, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, our calculations. The amount of onshore wind will be equivalent to land equal to New York State, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and New Hampshire, our calculations. The offshore wind area is an area slightly larger than West Virginia, parked out in the Atlantic Ocean and on the Great Lakes. There's no dispute between us and Jacobson on that land area. We're in agreement on that. The bare bones cost of this build-out will be $15.2 trillion. There's no dispute between Mike and me and Jacobson on that figure. Mark Jacobson acknowledges it's going to cost $15 trillion. We think we'll need an absolute minimum of 4 hours of additional pumped hydro. By that we mean enough maximum discharge capacity from expanded pumped hydro storage to deliver 1,591 gigawatts for a time period of 4 hours. Not that that would ever be a practical occurrence, but the capability to do that. Enough water in the reservoirs, enough generating capacity that if called upon, in theory, we could make 1,591 gigawatts for 4 hours. If we did that, that would run the cost up by another $1.3 trillion, bringing us up to that $16.5 trillion that we're calling for right there. We doubt that'll be enough. We'll probably need 24 grid hours of storage. Mike has coined the phrase grid hours to refer to the amount of time duration through which we could, if called on, generate the 1,591 gigawatts. That'll add $7 trillion to the $15 trillion, bringing us up to $22.8 trillion to build this contraption if we ever get around to doing it. Our plan, on the other hand, is to build that same 1,591 gigawatt grid with all primary energy generated by nuclear reactors. We too intend to make use of existing renewables and pumped hydro and expand the existing large hydro dams in the same way that the roadmap calls for. That is, some extra turbines for peaking and open the gates for the existing turbines for a greater number of hours, thereby raising their capacity factor. So that'll leave us with installing 1,515 gigawatts of nuclear capacity, average power, I should say. We prefer molten salt reactors, but if we have to, we'll go with Generation 3 Plus AP, advanced passive reactors.
It's easy to make the case, especially in the Gen 3 situation, that we don't need any backup or storage because we have 18 months equivalent storage in the reactor fuel.
To build all this will cost only $6.7 trillion, we estimate.
We're basing that on the South Korea price for their big project going on in the United Arab Emirates, which is now more than 1/4 finished and about to come online.
This is going to come in for a little over $4 per peak watt. Construction cost $4.40 per average watt. We figure we can build the 15 gigawatts that we need for $6.7 trillion. $6.7 trillion compared to 15.
If, on the other hand, we can move over to Gen 4 molten salt reactors, as we hope, we can do it for even less money than that. We think $3 trillion.
So the comparison is between our range of $3 trillion to $6.7 trillion versus the alternative 15 through $22 trillion. That $22 trillion, I might add, is more than U.S. annual gross domestic product. In terms of equipment, specific equipment, Jacobson's 35-year roadmap wants 500,000 wind turbines. These are the 5 megawatt variety. These things stand more than 100 meters in height, about 110 meters tall. I've never seen a 5 megawatt wind turbine. I would like to stand next to one and get some feel for just what that's like.
Besides that, we'll need 18 billion square meters of PV panels. That's counting both land mount, utility scale PV, and rooftop mount. That rooftop mount will occupy 75 million residences and almost 3 million commercial rooftops besides that. The number of wind and solar farms that will be judiciously placed throughout the United States will number over 50,000 wind and solar farms, each of which will have to be connected to the main trunk lines of the distribution grid.
If we allow a 40-year life cycle for these PV panels, and that will occur only if all the manufacturers come up to the Sun Power Company's quality control, that does appear to offer the opportunity for a 40-year lifespan on these things. The daily replacement rate of these PV panels, that is replacing the 18 billion over a 40-year period, removing the old ones, putting a new one in place, calls for 1.23 million square meters of PV panels replaced every day forever. Once we start this, as long as civilization lasts in the United States of America, somebody's got to remove 1.23 million square meters of PV panels every single day, including Christmas and Easter. And all this for $15.2 trillion plus backup and storage. Our 10-year roadmap, on the other hand, calls for, of course, utilizing existing renewables and pumped hydro. Not that it's worth mentioning. We only have 22 gigawatts of maximum discharge rate of pumped hydro as things now exist.
We too will have to install 1,515 gigawatts of factory-built MSRs, right where the power is needed, and in so doing avoid a lot of long-distance transmission hassle, and that's it.
And that's the end of it. Spend your $3 trillion and then break out the nachos and beer. Mike?
Just a friendly reminder, the numbers we ran past you are Jacobson's numbers. We predicated it on the high performance panel in existence, which is a higher performance panel than what he calculated with. We came out with 18 billion square meters. This is pretty much how we see renewables. A scheme to power the nation like this is like a ginormous self-operating napkin, and we feel that the interest in large-scale renewables is a direct result of a misinformed view of nuclear power. This is another finding we have. Quite frankly, residential solar is a big, fat waste of money. We're sorry we have to say this, but it's true. When I say a national cost, what we mean by that is what the nation would spend, not the homeowner getting a discount. When the homeowner gets a discount, the taxpayers make up the difference. Therefore, the national cost, 1.5 trillion, and that would provide 4% of the power for Jacobson's grid. 1.5 trillion would provide 1/2 of an entire national molten salt reactor grid.
Think of nuclear energy as packing a big punch in a tiny package, and renewables as packing a tiny punch in a big package. Renewables that way reverse the historical trend toward greater energy density.
Since wind, water, and sunlight can be thought of by their advocates as a less dense form of fuel, they can be thought of that way. They're not really fuel at all. What they really are, of course, as we all know, is ambient natural phenomena that can be exploited to produce energy if we get lucky, if they happen to occur on schedule.
The rational response to the climate change crisis would be a transition to carbon-free fuels, not a transition to a fuel-lacking paradigm, that is a fuel-free paradigm, where we don't have any fuel whatsoever.
The only reason we're not there yet, as everybody knows, is the fear of radiation and the overblown prices that result from that are the main reasons why nuclear power is not being pursued vigorously even now. We're careful in the paper to define backup and storage. Backup is extra generating capacity on standby that can rescue a supply shortage on short notice. By that we mean within a few minutes, sometimes within less than 1 minute. Storage holds a supply of energy that has already been produced, or fuel which is standing by ready to produce energy on demand. The problem is that the roadmap proposes that we put enough wind and solar in thousands of sweet spots around the country so that we don't need backup and storage, so that these sweet spot wind and solar farms can all back each other up without any fuel. They do acknowledge, the Jacobson team, that they'll need 1.5 hours of all grid energy. Again, think of that, although it's not a practical achievement, just think of it as the ability to generate 1,591 gigawatts for a time period of 1.5 hours. We call that, Mike has coined the phrase, grid hours, 1.5 grid hours. They call for that in thermal energy stored in molten salt derived from concentrated solar. In our opinion, it won't work.
The roadmap's approach to powering the nation with enough wind and solar in enough places, it should all be able to back each other up. So who needs storage? That is what we perceive as their attitude from the way they designed their system. And the operative word, of course, is should. The roadmap is an interdependent, interconnected, self-supporting, fuel-free national grid with about 1.5 hours of all grid power and storage. A strategy like this entirely depends upon accurate long-term weather prediction, not the climate, mind you, but the weather, in a world of ever-growing climate disruption. This is a huge gamble because you can't move a renewables farm when weather patterns change. The return on investment is too low to absorb the cost. So in a very real sense, a wind or solar farm is an energy island waiting for Mother Nature's bounty to come. Staking out a patch of wilderness and waiting for energy to come along is what we call a cargo cult approach to power. Back in World War II, remote Pacific Islanders marveled at the bounty that washed ashore from torpedoed ships and shot down planes. As far as they knew, they must have finally thrown the right virgin in the right volcano, because all of a sudden the gods are sending them tons of free goodies. Mother Nature sends us an inexhaustible bounty of wind, wave, tide, and sunlight. Wind and solar islands catch this motion and light and make them electric power. But if we can't use the power as soon as it's made, we have to find a way to store it, or we have to dump it. At least cargo cult spam had a shelf life. Over to you, Tim.
To repeat ourselves, massive backup and storage are the only ways that we think there's any chance to make a fuel-free renewables grid work, if it's at all possible. It probably isn't. The roadmap has zero fueled backup, next to nothing in the way of storage, 1.5 grid hours. As energy storage is right now in the world, 99% of all of it is pumped hydro. No other technology has demonstrated that it can be scaled. We don't think we can afford to build a $15 trillion grid and hope for a breakthrough in grid scale storage. By that, everybody, of course, means batteries. We have to proceed with the existing proven scalable technology, that's pumped hydro. We've decided to quantify that at 20 cents per installed watt-hour construction price. That's derived from an extensive study done by a university in Australia about 5 years ago, in which they surveyed all the large pumped hydro facilities in the world.
We've chosen to work with a very generous figure from the lowest quintile of 20 cents per installed watt hour. And on that basis, we can figure out just how much it takes to back up the roadmap. How much is that, Mike?
You would be surprised. Well, maybe you wouldn't actually. I've developed a term called 1ESB. It's short for Empire State Building. Imagine if the Empire State Building was nothing but water. 1 ESB, Empire State Building, would equal 250 megawatt hours of hydroelectric energy. 1 day of storage for the roadmap's 1,591 gigawatt national grid would equal 157,200 ESBs. Built window to window, that many ESBs will cover 19 Manhattan islands. That's 156 cubic kilometers of water, equal to 135 days of U.S. freshwater consumption. At 20 cents per watt hour, 24 hours of pumped hydro, 7.6 trillion. That's above and beyond the 15.2 trillion for his grid. And that 7.6 trillion, we'll point out, is over twice the price of an entire national molten salt reactor grid. In contrast, every commercial reactor has 18 months of energy storage right inside the core. It's called fuel. That's the big takeaway from our paper, is fuel is storage. Renewables are fuel-free systems. Like we said, the rational response to climate change is a transition to carbon-free fuel, not a transition to a fuel-free paradigm. It comes down to energy density. Energy has to be collected and directed to do work. Mother Nature has gathered and stored her energy in substances we call fuel. Stable, portable stuff from which we can extract the energy we need when and where we need it. While it's true that wind and solar are free, A, they're not fuels, B, exploiting them is expensive, and C, turning their motion and light into energy and storing that energy is even more expensive. What renewable advocates don't seem to fully appreciate are these two essential points. Fuel is storage, and renewables are fuel-free systems. I'm going to tell you a little story. Back in the day, before elephants were on the endangered list, they were sometimes used in metaphors for comic effect. When a person was drunk, they saw pink elephants. A white elephant was something you wouldn't dare get rid of, even though it was utterly useless and destroyed your finances. The term comes from a time when Thai royalty would gift the rare creatures to especially annoying patrons. The patrons couldn't refuse a royal gift, even though they knew it would ruin their lives. In our view, wind and solar farms are green elephants. An interdependent, fuel-free grid is an all-or-nothing proposition. All or most of the pieces have to be in place in order for the whole thing to hopefully work. Fueled power plants are entirely different. If we launch a build-out of fueled plants and abandon it halfway through, we would still have a collection of fully functional power plants. But if we launch the roadmap and abandon it halfway through, we'd have a herd of green elephants that will always need training wheels. And since coal is verboten, and nuclear is the work of the devil, and since we can't build any more rivers, the only acceptable backup is, Tim will tell you,
natural gas, otherwise known as methane. An interesting quote.
We're building these all over the country, and one of the questions we ask, we need about 3,000 foot in altitude. We need flat land, we need 300 days of sunlight, and we need to be near a gas pipe. Because, you know, for all of these big utility scale power plants, whether it's wind or solar, everybody is looking at gas as the supplementary fuel. The plants that we're building, the wind plants and the solar plants, are gas plants.
Well, give RFK credit for honesty. You're really just transferring the carbon dioxide load from coal over to natural gas. And to make things worse, it isn't even necessarily a net gain, because with the terrible global warming potential of natural gas, methane and the methane molecule, and the fact that it tends to leak from wells, pipes, and pumps, it doesn't take much leakage to undo the gain that you've accomplished by changing over from coal burning to natural gas burning. It turns out that the combined cycle gas turbine critical leak rate is only 4.0%. We call that the worth it threshold, perhaps better interpreted as the not worth it threshold.
No.
Once you get to that point, and a little bit beyond it means you would have been better off staying with coal than having switched over to burning natural gas to begin with, because the greenhouse gas infrared capture ability of the methane molecules undoes the good that you've done by eliminating CO2 emissions.
Yeah, beyond that, it's not worth doing.
It's not worth doing.
Yeah, hence the term.
You would have been better off just staying with coal.
Yeah.
The national leak rate, by the way, that's a little bit different, of course, depending on how good the capacity factor is for a wind or solar farm backed up by natural gas. It turns out that at about 25% capacity factor, a wind or solar natural gas-backed plant behaves about the same way as combined cycle gas turbines. At better capacity factors, which some wind farms have, then we can tolerate a bit more leakage before we get into net detriment from having switched off of coal. But at lower capacity factors, down around 15 to 20%, which some solar farms are stuck with, we can't leak any more than about 2 or 3% of our methane before we get into a not worth it condition.
Yeah, you might as well be burning coal.
Might as well have stayed burning coal.
Exactly. Regarding global warming, not total pollution, but regarding global warming, you literally might as well be burning coal.
Might as well.
Yeah.
The national leak rate admitted to by the natural gas industry is 1.6%.
Even if all the wind and solar farms were built and operated as perfectly as the technology would allow, with a national leak rate of 1.6%, that they can't control because that's the gas companies, the gas industry, that they are wiping out, that wipes out 40% of all the climate benefits we're trying to get from gas-backed wind and solar. So even if you build it perfectly, 40% of your intended gain is wiped out by the leak rate of an industry that you can't control. That's the thing the solar and wind people don't tell the people they sell their stuff to.
A very thorough examination, much more thorough than Mike and I were able to do, of the roadmap plan. The hydro backup equipment is going to be called upon to produce 1,300 gigawatts to make up the shortfall between what the primary energy demand of the country is and what solar and wind will be able to produce. The problem is the build-out as planned for hydroelectric dams and pumped hydro is only about 120 gigawatts. We're expecting to produce 1,300 gigawatts from a 120 gigawatt source. It's utterly impossible. We're going to find ourselves 90% short on those days in the dead of winter.
Yeah, one thing about that graph is it doesn't show what Jacobson's equipment will do, it shows what Jacobson's equipment will have to do to power the country. And what that graph shows is what the equipment will have to do is 1,300 gigawatts, or about 12-hour period day, 12 hours for 4 consecutive days. So the shortfall is 90% in the dead of winter. And this is their modeling of their system. This isn't our modeling, it's their modeling.
The only thing we've done is point out that, fellas, you don't have anything near the amount of generating capacity you're calling for. You have only 120 some gigawatts, which is our calculation.
This is the challenge of our era and will always be our legacy, whether we succeed or fail. That's what's going to be on our era's gravestone. And that includes all of us because there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. We are all crew. Go nuclear or go extinct.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks. All right, guys.
Thank you.